estrogen and androgen. So these are the important hormones that are produced by the adrenal glands. Now these are also known as corticosteroids or adrenal steroids. So they are mainly produced from cholesterol. So the production of the adrenal gland hormone starts from the hypothalamus. So the stimulus for the production of our adrenal steroids is the CRH, or the corticotropin releasing hormone. And this CRH will act on the AP, anterior pituitary, to produce the ACTH, or the corticotropin. And the ACTH now will act on the adrenal cortex to stimulate the production of these hormones, the mineralocorticoids, the glucocorticoids, and the androgenic steroids. So this morning, we are going to proceed to the second portion of the adrenal gland, which is the adrenal medulla. We also have here the different hormones or steroid hormones that are produced by the adrenal glands. So for the mineralocorticoids, we have the prototype mineralocorticoid that is being produced in the body is the aldosterone. We also have the prototype glucocorticoid that is produced in the body is the cortisol. And depending on the species, it varies according to the species. And for the androgens or the androgenic steroids, we have the testosterone and estrogen. So take note that the zona glomerulosa does not only produce the mineralocorticoid, aldosterone, but take note that almost all the portions or the sections of the adrenal cortex produces a small amount of some hormones. For example, in the zona glomerulosa, it also produces cortisol, but only in small amounts. For the zona fasciculata, it also produces the cortisol, which is mainly produced in the fasciculata. And the zona reticularis also produces glucocorticoids, but only in small amounts. So they are not exclusively being produced at one portion or at one zone of the adrenal cortex, but they are also produced in some other zones of the adrenal cortex. So to proceed with the adrenal medulla, so the adrenal medulla is anatomically defined as the central portion of the adrenal gland. So in the year 1932, Walter Cannon, so Walter Cannon is an American professor, and he is responsible for he coined the term fight or flight response. So when we say fight or flight response, that is defined as how do we define a fight or flight response? So when we say a fight or flight response, that is defined as an automatic physiological reaction to an event that is perceived as stressful or frightening. So when the individual is exposed to a certain type of extreme stress or a frightening event, that will lead to the stimulation of the adrenal medulla to secrete certain substances in order to combat or in order to overcome a particular event, such as a stressful environment. So this phenomenon, when, for example, a person or an animal is being exposed to a certain type of extreme stress or an extreme event or a frightening event, this phenomenon is known as a fight or flight response. And the fight or flight response was coined by this person ni Walter Cannon. So according to the fight or flight model that was proposed by Walter Cannon, this suggested that the external threats will elicit the fight or flight response. So when the fight or flight response of the body will be elicited, it will increase the activity rate of the different parts of the body, and it will also induce arousal. So these physiologic changes enable the individual either to escape from the source of stress or fight. So Cannon defines stress as a response to external stressors that is predominantly physiological in nature. So why do we term, or why does Cannon name this particular type of a response as fight or flight? Bakit siya tinawag na fight or flight? So for example, when a person is, or when an individual is being exposed of frightening environment, the fight or flight response will be elicited by the individual. So bakit kaya siya tinawag na fight or flight? So bakit tinawag siya na fight or flight? Itong ating mechanism. So let's answer that now on the next slide, when we finish this particular slide. So according to Walter Cannon, the fight or flight mechanism is a way wherein the body responds to a certain type of external stress, or extreme type of stress, or a frightening event, or threatening event. So in this case, an example of a threatening event that is being depicted in this type of diagram is meron tayong lion. So when a person perceives the lion, so when a person encounters a lion, the natural mechanism of the body is that it will perceive the lion as a threatening event. So it will induce a stress response to the person, because the person perceives that animal as frightening or threatening. So, and after that, when the individual perceives that particular animal as a threatening event, so what will happen is the brain will be stimulated, particularly the portion of the brain that will be stimulated is the uh, amygdala. So in the brain, we have there a part of the brain that is known as the amygdala, and this is the part of the brain that will perceive the sense of fear to that particular stimuli. So the amygdala will respond by sending signals to the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus will be the one that will be responsible to stimulate the autonomic nervous system. So when we say autonomic nervous system, that is a part of the central nervous system, particularly the PNS, na yung ating peripheral nervous system, that is mainly responsible for the involuntary responses in the body. So when there is a threatening event, the part of the PNS that will be stimulated by the brain will be the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. So what will happen is the hypothalamus will send signals to the adrenal gland, particularly the adrenal medulla, by way of nerves of the sympathetic nervous system. And this adrenal medulla will send or will be stimulated to release substances that are known as stress hormones, or they are also known as catecholamines. And these are the epinephrine and norepinephrine. So when the epinephrine and norepinephrine will be released now from the adrenal medulla, they will act on different tissues in the body. Now, for example, in the heart, they will act on the heart, they will bind with the receptor in the heart to increase the heart rate. No, and when there is an increase in the heart rate, so it will also increase the blood flow. In the lungs, for example, the epinephrine now will bind to the lungs, receptors in the lungs to increase respiration. So there is bronchodilation. So after this, when this happens, no, a majority of the body parts will be activated. No? So, of course, when you are faced with a threatening event, a frightening event, or an emergency case, of course, no, this will be the usual thing that will happen. So there will be increase in the heart rate, increase in the respiration, increase in the muscle strength, and the blood flow. No? So at this point, the energy will be mobilized from the body to prepare the body for vigorous muscle activity. So the person or the individual or the animal could either uh, the animal could either flee, or the animal could either face that particular uh, threatening event or stressful event in order to cope up with the stress that it encounters. So kaya tinawag siya na fight or flight response. Bakit siya tinawag na fight or flight response is that the individual, no, after perceiving this particular stress factor, so the individual could either stay, no, in fight that particular threatening event, or the individual could either run away or avoid or flee from that particular stressful event. So either way, no, if the regardless if the individual stays or the individual flees or run away from that particular stressful environment, so either way, the heart rate, the blood pressure, no, the respiration, all of these parameters will be increased. No, um, because of this mechanism that comes from the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, and also because of these stress hormones, no, the epinephrine and norepinephrine. So this is also another diagram, no, showing the different stimuli that will enhance the secretion of our catecholamines. So when we say catecholamines, what do we mean by catecholamines? So this refers to our epinephrine and norepinephrine. So I know that you already heard of this. Norepinephrine and epinephrine are both part of the brain or the nervous system and the endocrine glands. So when, for example, this epinephrine will act on the brain, they will be considered as neurotransmitter, and pag mag-act naman siya doon and they are also considered as hormones. So bakit tinawag na hormone yung ating epinephrine at saka norepinephrine? Bakit siya tinawag na hormone? So our catecholamines, now the epinephrine and norepinephrine, are considered as hormones because they are produced in the adrenal gland or the adrenal medulla, and they will act on distant cells or target tissues. They are also considered as neurotransmitters because they act on the brain in order to stimulate certain segments in the central nervous system. So the other stimuli, aside from a threatening event or a stressful event, the other stimuli that will enhance the secretion of the catecholamines are trauma, hypovolemia or the decrease in the blood volume, hypoglycemia. What is this hypoglycemia? Ano yung ibig sabihin ng hypoglycemia?
Decrease of glucose in the blood, sir.
Okay, so decrease in the blood sugar, or the glucose in the blood. Hypothermia, anxiety, as well as pain. So all of this will trigger the secretion of catecholamines, and catecholamines can be secreted in the this portion here. This portion here represents the adrenal medulla. So the adrenal medulla can produce epinephrine in the presence of acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is also another type of neurotransmitter that is released by the sympathetic nerve. So in the preganglionic nerve of the sympathetic nervous system, this part here will release acetylcholine, and acetylcholine will act on the postganglionic nerve in order to produce norepinephrine. So norepinephrine will act on the target cells at point of release. Okay. So the epinephrine is considered to be the main hormone of the adrenal medulla. So again, epinephrine can be considered as both a neurotransmitter and a hormone. So hormone siya because it is produced in an endocrine gland. So adrenal medulla or adrenal gland is an endocrine gland. And epinephrine can also act on distant cells. Now it can travel in the ECF or in the blood to act on target cells. So epinephrine was coined by the person known as John Abel in the year 1898. And this person, John Abel, used it to label the active ingredient obtained from extracts of the adrenal gland. So John Abel studied the adrenal gland, and when he obtained extracts from the adrenal gland, he found out that there is that particular chemical there that can, for example, increase the heart rate of a particular animal. When you use that in animals, so he found out that that particular ingredient can increase the heart rate of the tested animal. So he is the one that proposed or coined the term epinephrine. So the name epinephrine is related to the anatomical location of the adrenal glands above the kidney. So the adrenal glands is located above the kidney. So that is epi. Epi means above, above. And nephros is the Greek for kidney. So kaya tinawag siya na epinephrine. So for the history of the epinephrine, it became the first hormone to be isolated in the year 1988. It was crystallized in the year 1901, and it was synthesized in the year 1904. Aside from epinephrine, adrenal medulla also produces norepinephrine as another type of neurotransmitter or hormone that is produced in the adrenal medulla. These are considered to be the mediator of postganglionic activity of the sympathetic nervous system. So most of the norepinephrine are found in the plasma that are found in the plasma or in the blood originates from the adrenal medulla. So epinephrine is the major catecholamine secreted by the adrenal medulla of most mammals, except for these species, the whales, chickens, and all the fetal tissues. So when we say majority, uh, about 80% of the catecholamines that are produced by the adrenal medulla is epinephrine. And the other 20% is norepinephrine. So epinephrine can be abbreviated as API or EPI, and norepinephrine can also be abbreviated as NE. So the other name of epinephrine is adrenaline. So epinephrine is an American term or an American term, while adrenaline is a British term or a European term. So epinephrine is a drug or a medication, and it is also a hormone. As a medication, it is used to treat a number of conditions, including anaphylactic shock. So adrenaline or epinephrine is the drug of choice for anaphylactic shock. It is also indicated for cardiac arrest, asthma, and superficial bleeding. So why is it indicated for cardiac arrest? No, because epinephrine, no, yung kanina, no, we go back to our fight or flight response. When there is increase in the epinephrine in the blood, there is increase also in the heart rate. So during cardiac arrest, no, there is the cessation of the heartbeat or a decrease in the heartbeat. So to counteract this, epinephrine is indicated or epinephrine is administered. It is also indicated for asthma because during the fight or flight response, there is increase in the respiration. So there is a dilation of the bronchus. So in asthma, there is usually this constriction of the bronchi. So that epinephrine is indicated in asthmatic patients. And superficial bleeding, it is indicated for bleeding because epinephrine will induce the constriction of our arterioles or the blood vessels. So as a review of the organization of the autonomic nervous system, so again, when we say autonomic nervous system, you have to it can either be sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, meron siyang two parts. Meron siyang two parts, no, or two portions before it will reach the effector organ or the target organ. So meron tayong preganglionic neuron and the postganglionic neuron. So for the sympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic neuron will secrete or will release the hormone or the neurotransmitter, rather acetylcholine. So this N2 here refers to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. So it is a nicotinic receptor. And this portion here is also known as the autonomic ganglia, where the cell body of our nerves are located. This portion here is the postganglionic neuron of our sympathetic nervous system, and it is responsible for the release of NE or the norepinephrine. And it will act on the effector organs. So in this case, we have the effector organs of the postganglionic neuron of the sympathetic nervous system are the smooth muscle and the glands. So we also have here the different types of receptors. We have the alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, and beta 2. So ano nga yung tawag sa kanila? The collective term for this type of receptors, yung alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2. Ano yung tawag sa kanila? So they are collectively termed as adrenergic receptors. Ano naman yung tawag doon sa mga nerves that releases acetylcholine? Ano yung tawag natin doon? sa mga nerves no, that will release acetylcholine. Anong tawag natin doon sa mga nerves that will release the acetylcholine?
Postganglionic parasympathetic nerve po.
Okay. So, but take note that the postganglionic parasympathetic nerve fiber is not the only type of nerve fiber that will release acetylcholine. So, acetylcholine can also be released by the preganglionic nerve of the sympathetic nervous system, no? And also the postganglionic nerve of the sympathetic nervous system at on the sweat glands. So hindi lang siya exclusive no doon sa ating postganglionic parasympathetic nerves. Ano gani yung tawag doon sa type of nerves? Diba we have two types of nerves according to the neurotransmitters that they release. Two major types of nerves according to the neurotransmitters that they release no in the under the autonomic nervous system. Ano yung tawag doon? Pag yung nerve it releases catecholamines, and pag yung nerve naman releases the acetylcholine. Anyone? Ano ang ating tawag doon? So makikita ninyo sa figure na yung ating preganglionic nerve ng ating sympathetic at saka yung ating preganglionic nerve ng ating parasympathetic, it releases or it secretes acetylcholine. No, the same is true for the postganglionic nerve of our sympathetic when it will act on the sweat glands, and of course our postganglionic nerve of our parasympathetic acting on different sites. So pag ang nerve it releases acetylcholine, tinatawag natin siyang cholinergic cholinergic nerve, at yung ano naman yung pag ang nerve naman it will release the epinephrine, tinatawag natin siyang adrenergic naman. These receptors, so take note that our acetylcholine here will act on N2. So N2 here refers to the nicotinic receptor, and this receptor is a cholinergic receptor. We also have here the postganglionic nerve of our sympathetic nervous system will act on the muscarinic receptor of our sweat glands. So muscarinic receptor is a cholinergic receptor. So ibig sabihin, all of the sympathetic or all of our postganglionic nerve of our sympathetic nervous system will release norepinephrine except for our postganglionic nerve that will act on our sweat glands. In the adrenal medulla, so adrenal medulla or the simulation of the adrenal medulla is also under the sympathetic nervous system. So our preganglionic nerve will act on the adrenal medulla. It will act on the adrenal medulla, particularly on the nicotinic receptors of our adrenal medulla. So the particular neurotransmitter that is important to activate the adrenal medulla to release epinephrine and norepinephrine is the acetylcholine. And when the adrenal medulla will be stimulated, so it will release these catecholamines in the circulation. So this is also another diagram of our autonomic nervous system, particularly of our sympathetic nervous system. So take note here that the nerve fibers of the sympathetic nervous system comes from the thoracolumbar portion of our spinal cord, and it will and we have here yung ating mga uh, neurons or nerves that will exit the spinal cord, and these neurons will or nerves will act on different effector organs. Now, for example, uh, one of these nerves will act on the eyes, and it will induce mydriasis. Pag mydriasis, what do we mean by mydriasis? What do we mean by mydriasis?
Pupil dilation po.
Okay. So of course, no, during our fight or flight response, so the animal would tend to dilate the pupil. So that is known as mydriasis. The same is true for the salivary gland. No, during the sympathetic nerves will also innervate the salivary gland, and there will be reduction in the salivary flow. For the heart, of course, there will be increase in the heart rate and the stroke volume. For the blood vessel, there will be vasoconstriction of our blood vessels. So there will be decrease in the blood flow. For the gut, no, particularly the stomach, there will be reduce in the movement of the bowel or reduction in the peristalsis, as well as the secretion of gastric enzymes. For the liver, there will be the conversion of glycogen to glucose. So this is important as a source of energy, for the fight or flight mechanism. For the urinary bladder, there will be contraction of the sphincter of the the sphincter of the bladder, in order to inhibit urination. We also have here the sympathetic nerve that will stimulate the adrenal medulla. Particularly, that nerve is known as the splanchnic nerve. It will innervate the adrenal medulla to release epinephrine. For the synthesis of our catecholamines, so catecholamines are a group of amines that are derived from the amino acid tyrosine, and it contains the catechol group. So when we say catechol group, that is composed of a benzene ring with two hydroxyl groups, or OH. Amines are compounds that contain nitrogen in its chemical structure. So catecholamines are important as neurotransmitters and hormones. So again, when we say neurotransmitters, from the word neuro, it acts on the brain, and for the hormones, it acts on the endocrine system. So the most abundant catecholamines are epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. So epinephrine is again abbreviated as epi. It is an American term. Its counterpart in the British term is adrenaline. Norepinephrine is abbreviated as NE. Its counterpart in the British term is the noradrenaline, which is also abbreviated as NA. Dopamine is abbreviated as D. So catecholamines as hormone are released by the adrenal gland in situations of stress, such as psychological stress and hypoglycemia. So this is the structure of our catecholamines. So basically, they are termed as catecholamines because they are composed of a catechol group. So when we say catechol group, that is a group or that is composed of a benzene ring. When we say benzene ring, a benzene ring is composed of 6 carbon atoms that has the alternating double bonds. Double bonds. And we also have here 2 hydroxyl group attached to the benzene ring. So yan siya. That particular group is known as a catechol group. Its parent compound is known as phenylethylamine. So this is the structure of the dopamine, norepinephrine, and adrenaline. And these are the three major types of catecholamines that are released in the adrenal medulla. So the cells of the adrenal medulla that synthesize the catecholamines are classified as chromaffin cells. So the chromaffin cells are the specific cells of the gland that will secrete these catecholamines. So acetylcholine released from the preganglionic nerve fibers will initiate the synthesis of the catecholamines by the chromaffin cells. So acetylcholine is an important neurotransmitter that comes from the sympathetic nerve, particularly the preganglionic nerve or the splanchnic nerve. And it is important because it is the factor that will initiate the release of uh, catecholamines from the chromaffin cells. So the acetylcholine will stimulate the release of catecholamines from the chromaffin granules, and this phenomenon is known as the stimulus secretion coupling. So these chromaffin granules are located within the chromaffin cells. So this is the diagram of our stimulus secretion coupling. Stimulus secretion coupling is a mechanism whereby catecholamines are released from the adrenal medulla, particularly the chromaffin cells. So this diagram here represents the sympathetic nerve. So this sympathetic nerve is also known as the preganglionic nerve. And this cell here is the chromaffin cell. This portion here is the cell membrane of the chromaffin cell. The structures within the chromaffin cell is this blank space here is the cytosol that contains the cytoplasm. And we also have here the mitochondria and the endoplasmic reticulum. So the sympathetic nerve releases the neurotransmitter A or acetylcholine. So the acetylcholine will travel through a synapse. It will act on the R. The R here represents the cholinergic receptor, which is the nicotinic receptor. So pag mag-bind yung ating acetylcholine doon sa ating nicotinic receptor in the cell membrane, so it will initiate an action potential, will depolarize the cell, and it will stimulate the release of calcium ions coming from the ER and the mitochondria. So the calcium ions will be released from these structures here, and it will also open the calcium channels in the cell membrane so that the calcium will be imported from the outside to the inside. These calcium ions will be important in order to initiate exocytosis from the chromaffin granules. So this circles here represents the chromaffin granules, and they contain or they are loaded with catecholamines. So they can either contain epinephrine or they can either contain norepinephrine. So when calcium is present, the chromaffin granules will release the catecholamines by way of exocytosis. So during exocytosis, the chromaffin granules will combine, its membrane will combine with the plasma membrane to release the catecholamines in the ECF or in the blood. So in this way, the epinephrine or the norepinephrine will be able to traverse the blood. It will be carried in the blood to act on target or effector organs. So this is another representation of our uh, stimulus secretion coupling. So in this portion here, we have our nerve, and this is our chromaffin cell of the adrenal medulla. The nerve here is the name of the nerve that is responsible for the activation of our chromaffin cell is the splanchnic nerve. When we say splanchnic nerve, that is a nerve that will innervate yung ating splanch organs. So again, this portion here is the chromaffin cell. We have here the nucleus, the cytosol, and the chromaffin granules. So the chromaffin granules are those structures in the chromaffin cell that are loaded with catecholamines. So they could either contain norepinephrine, or they could either contain epinephrine, but not both. So we have specific granules that will contain epinephrine. We also have specific granules that will contain norepinephrine. So when acetylcholine will be released, it will act on the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. It will induce an action potential, and this action potential will open the calcium channel. And in this way, when the channel will be opened, it will induce the entry or the influx of calcium ions towards the chromaffin cell, and these calcium ions will be important for the release of catecholamines from the chromaffin granules by way of exocytosis. So that phenomenon or that event is also known as the stimulus secretion coupling. It is termed as stimulus secretion coupling because for the adrenaline, epinephrine, or the norepinephrine to be released from the chromaffin cell, we need a stimulus first. And that stimulus is mediated by the activation of our receptor here, by way of the binding of acetylcholine to the this particular receptor here, the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. So that is the stimulus, and the secretion happens at this portion here. We have our chromaffin granules that will be initiated to release the norepinephrine, adrenaline, or catecholamines in the presence of the calcium ions. So take note that the calcium ions are not only sourced from the outside of the cell, but they can also be coming from the ER and the mitochondria. So the synthesis of the catecholamines begins with either phenylalanine or tyrosine. So phenylalanine and tyrosine are amino acids. So however, tyrosine is a naturally occurring amino acid, and most synthesis of catecholamines begins with tyrosine. So tyrosine is an non-essential amino acid, while phenylalanine is an essential amino acid. So pag sinabi natin essential amino acid, it is not readily manufactured in the body, so that majority of the catecholamine synthesis comes from the tyrosine. So tyrosine is a precursor to the catecholamine synthesis. So this is the pathway whereby the catecholamines are being synthesized in the adrenal medulla. So it all starts with the amino acid tyrosine. So tyrosine here will be activated by an enzyme known as the tyrosine hydroxylase to form DOPA. DOPA will be activated by AAD, an enzyme to form dopamine. Dopamine again will be acted upon by DBH, to form norepinephrine, and norepinephrine will again form epinephrine. So again, going back to the pathway, the shaded portion here represents the structural changes that occurs at each step. So for example, from tyrosine and DOPA, the structural change that happens here is there is the attachment of the hydroxyl group in this particular portion here of the catechol group. So there is attachment of the hydroxyl group, and this is facilitated by the enzyme tyrosine hydroxylase. So when we say hydroxylase, that is an enzyme that will attach a hydroxyl group to a certain compound. We also have here the AAD. The D here represents the decarboxylase. So when we say decarboxylase, that is an enzyme that will remove carboxyl group from this compound here. So take note here na yung ating dopamine, wala na siyang carboxyl group because of the action of the enzyme AAD. So for the actions of our catecholamines, so the catecholamines are important for the regulation of intermediary metabolism. So when we say intermediary metabolism, that is the metabolism of the important compounds in the body, such as the carbohydrate, the proteins, and the fats. The catecholamines are, of course, very important for the fight or flight response, because through the fight or flight response, it is the mechanism whereby the animal will be able to adapt to acute type of stress or a frightening situation. So catecholamines, to be able to produce its biologic activity on the effector organ, it must first act on a certain type of receptors, and those receptors are known as adrenergic receptors. And these adrenergic receptors are located on the target tissues. So therefore, ang action ng ating catecholamines, the magnitude of their effect will depend on the presence or the abundance of the adrenergic receptors that are located on that particular target organ. So for example, in the heart, there are more adrenergic receptors in the heart. So the heart will be activated as compared to other organs with lesser adrenergic receptors. So this is the diagram of our sympathetic nervous system. Again, it's composed of the preganglionic nerve and our postganglionic nerve. And the postganglionic nerve will be the one that will be located at the immediate vicinity of our target or effector organ. So in this diagram, it is illustrated that the target organ of our sympathetic nervous system is the eyes, particularly the pupil. We also have the salivary gland, the lungs or the bronchi, the heart, and the gut or the stomach, as well as the bladder, urinary bladder, and the liver. So this, the one in green represents the preganglionic nerve. So they will release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. So they are also known as adrenergic nerve. The one in red here is the postganglionic nerve. So they will release the norepinephrine. And they are also known as adrenergic nerve. So this is also another simplified diagram of our preganglionic neuron and the postganglionic neuron and the effector organs. So the link between the preganglionic neuron and the postganglionic neuron is the autonomic ganglia. So in the case of the sympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic neuron will release acetylcholine, and the postganglionic neuron will release norepinephrine, except for the sweat glands, because in the sweat glands, the postganglionic neuron will release acetylcholine. So this is another representation of the anatomy of our preganglionic neuron and our postganglionic neuron. So the preganglionic neuron originates from the spinal cord. So in the case of the sympathetic nervous system, it originates from the thoracolumbar portion. And it will meet the postganglionic, and the preganglionic will meet at the autonomic ganglia. And at this portion here, the preganglionic neuron will release acetylcholine. The postganglionic neuron is the one that will innervate the effector organ. So in this particular diagram, the effector organs are the smooth muscle and the bronchi. So we also have here, another representation of our sympathetic nervous system. So this is the typical structure of the sympathetic nervous system innervation. We have here our preganglionic nerve, our autonomic ganglia, and our sympathetic nerve, and our effector organs. For the adrenal medulla, we have here our sympathetic nerve, particularly the splanchnic nerve, and we have here the adrenal medulla, and we don't have the postganglionic nerve, because the adrenal medulla is the one that will release the catecholamines, the norepinephrine and the epinephrine, to act on different target tissues. So this diagram here represents the effects of the sympathetic innervation to the different tissues. So in the pupil, it will induce mydriasis, or the dilation of the pupil. In the salivary gland, it will reduce the production of the saliva, so there is decreased salivation. In the lungs, it will induce the dilation of the bronchi, bronchodilation. So in the heart, it will induce tachycardia, or the increase in the heart rate. In the stomach, it will decrease the digestion. And in the bladder, it will decrease urination. So these effects here will be produced when this particular hormone, norepinephrine, will act on the adrenergic receptors that are present in these particular tissues. When we are going to review the different types of adrenergic receptors, we have two major types of adrenergic receptors. We have the alpha and the beta. So when we say alpha receptors, they can either be alpha 1 or alpha 2. For the beta receptors, they can either be beta 1, beta 2, and beta 3. So in terms of their function, for the alpha adrenergic receptors, they control the release of catecholamines from the sympathetic nerve endings, with alpha 1 controlling the release of the catecholamines from the postsynaptic nerve, while the alpha 2 receptors will control or will affect the release of catecholamines from the presynaptic nerve endings. So for the beta 1 or for the beta receptors, the beta 1 receptors, because they are mainly found in the heart, no, so they will affect the heart. For the beta 2 receptors, they are a majority of them are found on the lungs, so they will affect the dilation of the bronchi. They are also found on the smooth muscles, particularly on the smooth muscles of the blood, no, blood vessels. So they will induce contraction of the blood vessels. And they are also important for intermediary metabolism. So this is a diagram of the summary of the different effects of stimulating the adrenergic receptors. So when, for example, the our agonist to the beta 1 receptor will bind to beta 1 receptor. So what will happen is there will be increase in the heart rate. For the beta 2 receptors, so for example, when our agonist to the beta 2 receptor will be, our agonist will bind to the beta 2 receptor that is found on the lungs. Now it will induce the dilation of the bronchi or bronchodilation. When the agonist, when our beta 2 agonist will bind to the blood vessels, it will induce vasodilation. So when our beta 2 agonist will bind on the liver, on the beta 2 receptor of the liver, it will induce the glycogenolysis. When our beta 2 agonist will bind to the beta 2 receptors that is found on the pancreas, it will induce the release of the glucagon. The same is true for the alpha 1 receptor. So when an alpha 1 agonist will bind to the blood vessels, particularly on the arterioles, so it will induce vasoconstriction. When our alpha 1 agonist will bind to the pupil, the alpha 1 receptor in the pupil, so it will induce the dilation of the pupil. When our alpha 1 agonist will bind to the alpha 1 receptor that is located on the urinary bladder, so it will induce the closure of the bladder sphincter. So any question with our topic? So this PowerPoint has already been uploaded in our VLE. So if you have questions, so you can send that through our group chat or through email. And if you have no questions, so we'll continue our topic on the adrenal medulla no next meeting tomorrow, bukas.